You're at the trailhead before first light. You pull up your mapping app, you zoom into the basin you've been staring at all summer. Timber, maybe some open parks, a drainage through the middle. It looks perfect. So you hike in, you spend a couple days there, but you find nothing. Not tracks, not rubs, not poop. You come out wondering what went wrong. And I can tell you exactly what went wrong. It wasn't the basin, it was what you missed on the map before you ever left the truck. And that's what we're fixing today. Most elk hunters look at a map but don't really read it. They find a green area with a creek, pick a trailhead, and call that scouting. That's not reading a map, that's looking at one. A topo map is a language. Every line, every spacing, every curve tells you something specific about how terrain behaves, and elk behavior is terrain behavior. Elk use terrain in completely predictable ways. Once you know the language, high probability locations jump off the screen before you ever set foot in country. I'm going to walk you through exactly how to read it. Now, here's why I'm the right person for this. I've been hunting and guiding elk on public land in the western mountains for 34 years. I've also spent over 30 years as a strength and conditioning coach, which matters here because coaching is about breaking complex systems down into learnable skills, and that's exactly what map reading is. I've killed elk in terrain that looked unremarkable to anybody who didn't know what to look for. Map reading changed that. It's a learnable skill. Once it's locked in, it changes everything about how you prepare for a hunt. Now, before we get into specific terrain features, you have to understand what contour lines are actually telling you. Everything else builds on this. A contour line connects every point at the same elevation. Every line on that map is flat, right? What changes between lines is the vertical drop called the contour interval. Most Western hunting topo maps use 40-foot intervals. Every line you cross means 40 feet of elevation change. Spread apart lines means gentler slopes, right? Tight lines means steeper slopes. Lines that nearly touch means cliff. And where lines form V shapes, that tells you whether you're looking at a ridge or a drainage. Now, here's the one rule you have to burn in. V shapes pointing uphill mean drainage. V shapes pointing downhill mean ridge. Valley points up, ridge points down. That single rule is the foundation of every terrain feature I'm about to show you, so lock it in before you move on. Now, before we talk about food or water, we start where elk think first: security. If a piece of country doesn't feel safe, elk aren't going to use it regardless of what's nearby. A lot of people start with food. I think that's a mistake. The first thing to identify on any map is security. Security terrain is any ground that gives elk a physical advantage over a predator, right? This is going to be where elk go when pressure hits and where pressured elk spend their daylight hours in a public land unit. On a topo map, you're trying to identify the roughest, steepest, most difficult to access terrain in your unit first. Mark it. When elk get pressured on public land, that's where they're going to go. Start with the security first, right? Where the contour lines get closer, where things get steeper and nastier, especially if you can layer in dark timber on top of that. Everything else on the map is going to get filtered through that. Aspect is the direction of a slope face. It's one of the most underused map reading skills in elk hunting, and it's going to connect directly to security, cover, and food all at once. So determine the aspect on your topo map by figuring out which direction the contour V opens towards. These that are pointing north are going to mean that that's a north-facing slope. These that are pointing south means that's a south-facing slope. North-facing slopes are going to hold more moisture, grow denser, darker timber, like fir and spruce, and they're going to stay a little bit cooler. So in warm early season conditions, elk seek north-facing timber to regulate temperature. Dark cover gives them security as well during daylight hours. When August is hot, that's where elk are going to disappear to, which is going to lead you into where elk are going to be at the beginning of September. South-facing slopes are drier, more open, and hold more browse. They're food terrain. Elk move to south-facing ground to feed in the evening and in colder weather. Map the north-facing timber for daytime security. Map the south-facing openings for evening feed. Those routes are going to be the connecting lines that are where your setups live. Now, if I could look at only one terrain feature on a topo map for elk hunting, it would probably be the saddle. A saddle is the low point between two higher points on a ridge. On a topo map, it looks like an hourglass, two sets of closed contour lines pinched together in the middle. And that pinch is the saddle. Sometimes it'll only come off of one slope, sometimes it comes off of two, sometimes it's just a low point in the ridge. Elk are big, heavy animals. So when they need to move from one drainage to another, or from security to feed, from one basin to the next, or from south basin to north basin, they take the path of least resistance. That's the saddle. Not every time, but often enough that it really matters. Elk from both drainages funnel through the same point season after season. So look for saddles connecting two separate drainages, not just minor spur saddles, but the lowest crossing point between two distinct basins or drainages or a major steep ridge. The deeper and more defined the saddle, the more concentrated the movement. Mark every significant one in your unit. A bench is a flat section of terrain on an otherwise steep slope. On a topo, it appears as contour lines that are spreading wider. It's indicating flat ground that's surrounded by tighter contour lines above and below, indicating more steep ground there. So elk use benches for travel and staging. A bench is a natural pause point where elk read the wind and survey the country below before committing to moving. You're going to find sign on benches. You're going to find elk on benches a lot of times, and setups near benches can absolutely produce encounters. What benches aren't, though, reliably, is just a bedding destination, so try not to look at them like that. They can be, but big open benches tend to be more travel corridors. Elk don't lock onto a bench the way they lock onto food and water. The elk on a bench are usually going somewhere, towards feed, towards water, towards security. The bench is a stop on the route, not necessarily always the reason for the route. So mark your benches, especially on north-facing slopes, near saddles, and escape terrain. Build your strategy around what the bench connects to, not necessarily hunting the bench itself. Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations and Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory, it's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com. The next feature I want to talk about is a drainage, and that's the low gut between two major ridges, the series of V shapes pointing uphill on your topo map. So drainages are where elk country organizes around food, water, security, and movement all simultaneously. So they're super important, right? Not all drainages are equal either, and the map is going to tell you which ones are probably worth your time before you hike 5 miles in. You want to look for three things: the shape, a drainage that starts wide, narrows down in the middle, and opens into a classic basin at the upper end. That's a great elk drainage. The narrows concentrate movement. The upper basin provides more feed and space. Timber. A drainage that's entirely open is simply maybe a feeding area or a feeding area at night, not a living area. Elk are going to pass through. What you want is a timbered flank above, open ground lower, and then maybe water through the middle. In pressure, on public land, elk abandon obvious primary drainages early. Secondary drainages requiring extra miles or vertical are where those elk love to go when the main country fills up. Now, an ecotone is a transition zone between two habitat types, like timbered edge meeting an open park, or a brushy field meeting a meadow, or dark spruce meeting an aspen pocket. Those edges are where elk love to feed and where most hunting encounters actually happen. Elk feed in the open and they feel secure in the timber. They spend their lives, their active lives, working back and forth between those two. The edge is where that transition happens. Elk don't stand in the center of an open meadow any longer than they have to in daylight. They work the timberline in and out of cover as they graze. On your mapping app, overlay the satellite layer on your topo map. That's where the contour lines are going to suggest a gentler slope, and then the satellite shows a hard timber edge. That's a feed and staging area. Consider how elk are going to approach their security cover from there, how thermals move in the morning and evening, and then you're not just marking a location anymore, you're building an actual setup. Water on a topo map is usually blue, probably the easiest thing to find on a topo map, right? Your creeks as lines, lakes as your filled shapes, your springs and your seeps as small symbols or short line segments beginning high on a slope. Here's what most hunters miss. The blue on your topo is the obvious water, and elk know where all of it is. In high pressure country, elk shift away from predictable water sources that hunters can easily find because everybody else knows it. The water that matters for you, the water that matters most for hunting, is the water that isn't obvious on the map. So your springs and seeps high on a slope, far from trails, far from named creeks, are gold. Elk use those with more consistency and less caution than water near roads, right? And on your satellite layer, look for green areas, right? On that slope where you might not expect it or where it's not necessarily near the blue. That's often a spring that doesn't appear on the topo but reveals itself in the vegetation from above. Water, near security terrain, and dark timber is a real combination that you're always trying to build towards. Now, elk don't live at one elevation year round either, right? They follow food and weather up and down the mountain, and your map work has to account for timing, or you're just going to be scouting the right terrain at the wrong elevation. So in summer, elk are usually near the timberline, up in those high basins, the open parks, the thermal terrain. And as the temperatures cool down in late August and September and the vegetation dries out, they usually transition down into the darker timber below the high country. By late September and into the rut, they're in mid-elevation, pretty heavy cover usually. Late season pressure and snow can push them around from all those places. For archery season, I would focus on the transition zones between that high alpine summer range and maybe that mid-elevation rut country. Elk tend to stage here in early September, out of the high basins but not yet pushed all the way down. So look for where that dark timber, the springs, the saddles, and the feed edges all converge in that transition band. Build your map work around your hunt date. The terrain doesn't move, but the elk do. Now, every feature I've covered, security terrain, aspect, saddles, benches, drainages, timber edges, water, elevation bands, they don't work in isolation. The highest probability elk locations are where multiple features all stack on top of each other. A north-facing bench adjacent to a saddle with a seep running out of it, sitting at the edge of dark timber before it opens up into a park, backed by some nasty-looking country, that's just not a good elk location. That's an elk address. That's a place with sign every time you walk in. And this is what map scouting really is about, reading the whole system, not just individual features. When a location checks multiple boxes at once, mark it, name it, put some notes in there, put it at the top of your list. When it checks only one box, keep looking. The X is where features converge, right? The map is going to show it to you right now before you ever lace up your boots in September. The elk hunters who consistently find elk aren't the ones who just cover the most miles. They're the ones who know exactly where they're going before they leave the truck because they've already been there on the map. Security first, then food, then water, then where all three overlap, that's your system. So start on your map tonight. Pick your unit, zoom in, and start identifying everything we covered. Drop your questions in the comments. I read every single one. Your September is built right here on this screen, not on the mountain. Now, if this episode made you realize you need a better elk plan this season, don't just watch another video and hope it all comes together. Build the plan right now. If you want to study my full system on your own, start with my elk hunting series of ebooks. If you want daily guidance, accountability, and a place to ask questions as season gets closer, join Team Backbone. If you want my eyes on your actual hunt plan, your maps, access, terrain, pressure points, wind, thermals, and your actual strategy, book an elk hunt plan audit with me, and I'll help you tighten it up before season. Body, your legs, your lungs, your ability to handle mountain miles and a heavy pack, check out my Backbone Unlimited training plans. And if nutrition is where you need more structure, getting leaner, fueling long days, or building a better in season food plan, check out my nutrition plans. The hunters who are ready in September and October are the ones who start tightening their plan right now. So go to backboneunlimited.com, choose the path that fits where you are right now, and I will help you get started. Thanks for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'll see you in the comments. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.